All right, let's go, guys. Welcome to the 10th episode of MEV Space, which brings together the sharpest minds in crypto to dissect the evolving MEV landscape and beyond. Today's topic is about data. From gas markets to proposer behavior, from blob throughput to MEV flow. So data has become the backbone of Ethereum's evolution, but it wasn't always this way. All of us kind of like have some ideas about that. So for years, like we kind of like flew like blind. So now we are entering the second decade. So our ability to measure and act on real-time data will define the protocol's future. So today is a part one of the MEU spaces, discussing the importance of data in the development of Ethereum. We have all the gigantic brain here. So I like to all the speakers to do a self-introduction about who you are and when you think about your own work and what kind of Ethereum data are you most focusing on day by day and how do you actually use that data? How about we start from Kofi?
Yeah, good to see everyone. My name's Kofi. I work as a senior data scientist on the base team, and yeah, in terms of the data that I work with, I guess there's a few levels to that, right? I mean, obviously, on our team, we're looking at things from a product perspective, so we have certain high-level metrics that we always want to track and look at. So that's a lot of taking raw transaction traces logs and transforming them into metrics calculations around revenue and quality active users and assets on platform and so on. But I guess the level above that is measuring impact. So with different initiatives that we're working on to grow different parts of base, setting up experiments where we say, hey, we're doing this because we want to move this metric and we have some tooling set up to sort of measure whether or not this initiative that we launched actually moved the metric. And of course, level above that is making predictions. But I think mostly in my day-to-day, I do, metrics and some experimentation. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Next one, Thomas.
Hi, yeah. Hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Thomas. I work at the EF. I'm a researcher there. And I think, yeah, it's been, in terms of the kind of data I've been dealing with, it's been very different over the years. Like early on, I was actually working at Dune, so was kind of close to transaction data and sort of like execution level data. Then I looked into MEV quite a lot. So it was like relay data, builder data, mempool data. And I think it's like still very much like of interest to me. We have like some recent papers on text orbs and searchers and so on. But yeah, I've mostly looked at consensus data. And yeah, even more recently, I'm even more interested in like P2P data because I actually think there is a lot of low hanging fruits there and like a lot of room for improvement for Ethereum there. So yeah, everything around like propagation of messages between validators, for example, is like interesting to me these days. Yeah, and then I guess more high level, my sort of like way of using data is more to inform some like proposals or like protocol upgrades I want to work on. So it's just like using P2P data, consensus data, or any other sort of like data that will help me sort of like inform some protocol upgrades we want to do, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Next one, Stan.
Hi, hello. Yeah, my name is Sen. I'm a co-founder of New Construct. New Construct started in 2020 as a MEV shop. So we're going to be pretty successful. I think if I nominate us as the most profitable transaction of 2024. So that's a funny fact for you. And now we're building Tool, which is a trading infrastructure. So it's a quite interesting discussion, especially from our researcher experience, is that 4 years ago, when all DeFi summer and all this just started, data was just collecting data on pools, on tokens, finding new ways to trade. So pretty slow data, but now, if you want to search successfully, so you have to collect way more than that. Our focus right now is on analyzing how people bid. So accumulating, segmenting trading flow into different providers, trying to understand risk attitude of different participants, how auctions work, things like that. And it's also interesting is that 4 years ago, comparing to say TradFi, which is built around backtesting, right? You had nothing to backtest 4 years ago, but now if you want to fine tune your bidding strategies, understand how competition works, it's all about backtesting, and getting this data is a whole different level. It's quite complicated because you need not just only data that is on chain, you also have to know what didn't land on chain. So bids that lost. So for example, you're bidding for some trading flow and you lose, and usually you don't see bids that haven't won, and it's a pretty important source of information if you want to analyze bidding strategies on different participants. So yeah, we build a pipeline to collect this data to some extent. Of course, I mean, builders and workflow providers don't share this data, so it's quite interesting work.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, we can talk about that more. So last, Irfan.
Hi, yeah, my name's Irfan. I'm founder at Interstate. We're working on pre-confirmations and other forms of block building. I can kind of give perspective on data. Historically, data on Ethereum, the biggest like data mismatch in the block building pipeline that I can see relates to mostly private order flow. Obviously, there's a lot in the public mempools, but there's also a lot in the private mempools on Ethereum. And actually, in fact, it's much worse on other blockchains, where most alpha is around hidden data that some parties have access to, but not others. This is probably the best on Ethereum versus other blockchains, where the Ethereum MEV pipeline's done a pretty good job of enabling equal access for as many people as possible. But there's definitely more steps you can take to kind of reduce this, to kind of reduce some of the private order flow and enable more parties to see everything possible.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. We're definitely excited to continue on with this discussion. Jumping into the first question here, directed to Thomas or Toma. I apologize if I mess it up. But let me kick it off, and then we'll have Thomas lead. So the hindsight is 2020, and while looking back, Ethereum has made a lot of pivotal decisions with imperfect data. What do you think we misread in the past, and how does that shape how we build infra and approach research now?
Yeah, Thomas is fine, no worries. And I mean, I don't think I want to go into like everything we got or like we misread. There was quite a lot of different things, but I think that's normal. Like almost every decision is going to be made based on imperfect data, and then it's also like things are changing and you have to like readjust all the time. If I had to pick one thing, I would say the fixed like 32 ETH staking requirements was quite hard to deal with, or like is quite hard to deal with now, because it led to basically nodes running like tons of validators, and now we have like over 1 million validators today on the network, and that's basically like a lot of overhead in terms of bandwidth and traffic and everything for virtually no reason. And so I mean that got better, right? Like in the last upgrade, so in Pectra, we actually shipped something that lets you consolidate validators, and you can now have like a validator with up to 2048 ETH. So yeah, maybe I'll also use this as a call to do it if you can, because it does help the network considerably, and it will make it easier to ship like very important features like faster finality and stuff like this. But yeah, I think the challenges are maybe less also about like misreading things than prioritizing the right things. That's actually very hard in a sort of like decentralized setting. So there's more and more efforts, at least from us, from the EF these days, to like increase transparency about what goes on into Ethereum upgrades, to gather like a lot more feedback from the community. So I don't know if you've seen, but like there is forecast and sort of like tier lists and stuff like this that let people sort of like be more informed, but also like signal preferences for some EAPs rather than other. And yeah, it's super important because like it allows us to surface what are the biggest pain points or what people really care about. And yeah, another good thing is to get as many people as we can to chime into like the process, whether it's governance or like proposing ideas, just because, you know, the more people, the more eyes on like upgrades, the less likely we are to like misread a situation or so yeah.
Awesome. Irfan, anything to add on that?
Yeah, on the yeah. Yeah, so in terms of just to add to my prior point on data access, I think that right now, I think in the MEV pipeline, as relates to the MEV pipeline, the biggest asymmetry that we see is some parties, have access to flow, and other parties not. I think there's been a lot of attempts by some of the people on this panel as well to kind of build like permissionless auctions. Flashbots has made strides here. New Construct is working on a project relating to this. I think, I think there's a lot of promising projects to kind of reduce information asymmetry in the MEV pipeline.
Cool.
Okay, a third question is about like critical data streams and also something about like a builder's blind spot. So I want to start from Kofi. So from your vantage point, like which Ethereum data streams are most critical for builders today? And where do you still see blind spot that make it hard to move fast at basis scale?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I'll start with talking about the stuff that isn't critical. Well, I mean, that is critical, but isn't hard to get. So right now, there's tons of providers you can work with if you want to get, say, raw transactions traces logs for a bunch of different chains. Things are very different than they were in sort of 2021, where maybe Dune was one of the only platforms that you could use, maybe Alchemy. There's now a lot more startups in the data space that can, give you the basic offering at a good quality. And I feel like what builders are really struggling to get now is that second layer above, that layer of interpretation on top of the data. So not just, raw logs or raw transactions in an API or webhook, but I want to know what are the balances for these wallets, what was the trading volume on this token, and something along the lines of, how much liquidity is there on dexes for some other asset that's being launched. And, I think that we're at a point now where that second layer, the interpretation layer, is something that only a few providers are good at, Dune being one of them. And on the other side, people have issues with latency. So, something that we've been getting a lot of asks for from teams at Base recently is maybe folks wanting to build new trading tools on Base who not just want interpretation layer level data like liquidity on certain assets, but also need it in really low latency. So they want to get it at a fraction of a second because they have users who are, doing activities like trading where speed matters a lot. So yeah, I think that hopefully what we'll see over the next few months, over the next few years, is a lot of the data providers that we have just moving up the stack and making sort of these curated data sets, as opposed to just serving raw data or decoded data, and also working to improve latency so that people can build even better real-time consumer applications.
Cool. Sen, you want to add more from the infra level?
Oh, yeah, sure. So we're focusing on analyzing trading flow first and foremost. It doesn't matter whether we're, search or building tool. And the big issue with order flow, this transition to private transactions over, past, say, 2-3 years, because like 4 years ago, everything was happening in transaction pool, right? Every transaction was there. You saw how people bid, you saw how won the auction. So it's pretty transparent. But now, I'd say if we're talking about MEV flow, I mean, flow that contains some arb opportunities, I'd say that around 70% is private, 15% is like public, and 10% is unknown. Means that we don't know sources of this flow. And people talk about, say, builder centralization, right? But they don't talk about order flow provider centralization. And this data is not really available. So, for example, I can give you a hash of a transaction. Can you tell me what's its origin, right? Is it MEV blocker? Is it MetaMask? Is it public? So you can answer this question. So, for example, the rather available data sets and from Flashbots, they can say that this transaction is public. But if you want to compile a proper data set with labeled transactions by their origins, you have to collect this data yourself, and it's just part of the problem because most of order flow providers have quite high entry barriers. So you cannot just connect to them and receive their flow. We as a searcher is a respected searcher quite in good position. So we have access to most of the trading flow. So we just label this data ourselves to understand, how people behave, say, trading on MEV blocker, how they trade on different platforms. It also helps with development of tool because, it's not just about market research. It's just understanding the centralization of this space. People may collude. It's not just competition. This, it's quite interesting is that the more you see how people trade, the more access you have, in different auctions. It's really interesting game theory research. So you can really, if you have access to this data, write decent papers, like scientific papers of people behave, because it's not just a scientific experiment where you give people $10 and then they play a game. It's actual people bidding with their own big money, and you can experiment with different auction structures. Give you an example. Recently, we ran a research in Tool. The question is quite simple. So, private flow is sealed bid auction mostly. So you don't see your competition. You have only one chance to bid. So what will happen if Tool allows that? It's one of our ideas. What will happen if we unify access to this private flow, which making like semi-private, but we also switch towards open auction, so people can see each other's bid. They can outbid each other. So what will happen to order flow providers' revenue? So, and answering this question is not as simple because you have to analyze bidders' behavior, asking questions like what's their risk attitude, what's their valuations, how does it all work? And in order to answer these questions, you need access to this data, and this data is not readily available. You have to make big assumptions on how people, how players of this game behave. Well, answering this question, we think that turning private order flow to open auction can boost order flow providers' revenues to some extent. I think our results 19% median, something like that. But yeah, this data is not available, and if it becomes available, we can make Ethereum more efficient, of course.
That's awesome. I feel like that leads really well into the next question for you, Sen. So how do you see decentralization or credible neutrality being measured in practice? And does that current approach?
It's an
yeah.
interesting question. It's not measured, and I can tell you why. Because people do not have visibility on what's dropped from chain. And we suffered, so we know that something's going on because we suffered ourselves as a trading shop. So, for example, we submit a transaction, it's not included. We may lose some money, and then we try to reach out to builders asking like, why was it dropped? And reply usually, something to do with timing, something to do with I don't know, whatever. And and it's hard to track because it's impossible unless you are the builder that does this job. Is that well, you don't have access on, so you only have access to winning transaction because it's on chain, right? You don't have access to all the I don't know other 50 transactions that were competing for the same spot. So that's one problem. Another problem I think is that if you ask about say centralization, I think we have to distinguish centralization and whether it's like bad or good. So centralization on its own, it's nothing bad with it, right? The problem is when people start exploiting it. The situation that I think we see with builders, because they run their own trading shops. So if you run a trading shop, you basically submit your flow to competing party, right? And that's another idea behind tool is that again we want to unify this order flow so that enforce these processing rules by TEs so that people play fair game. So in terms of builder centralization, in terms of order flow centralization, we track that again because we label order flow origins. So it's pretty centralized, I'd say. I think that I'd say top 3 players, like 75% of flow, something like that. It's I don't remember exact numbers. I'm sure I can actually give you to you, but yeah, it's pretty centralized.
Awesome. Do you think that gives any the current approach gives builders confidence in the market, or what do you think is the sentiment?
Around builders? I mean, block builders?
Sorry, more like builders, not in the context of block building, but like application builders, or like DApp builders.
Well, I think that in terms of again trading, because we trade and build trading infrastructure, I think trading becomes more and more TradFi-like, where volume is like the ultimate value of what you build, and it's heavily protected by parties who have it. So I think that the more it's not even like DeFi at this point, right? Because you got a lot of intent trading that basically everything's happening off chain, so you don't have visibility, say, on Uniswap X, right? What's going on there? Who is submitting quotes? Who is winning RFQ auctions? Who's getting this 1% advantage for I don't remember exactly the 10 blocks or what. So it's all happening off chain, and I think that the result of it is that entry barrier, if you want to work with trading flow, is pretty high at this point. So even, for example, from searcher's perspective, 4 years ago, if you're smart enough, you can jump in from your garage. You can just be quite successful. Now it's pretty much impossible without BD. So you have to talk to people. You have to get access to this order flow auctions. So it's I mean, people protecting their flow. That's, I guess, the bottom line.
Awesome. And Tomas, anything to add from the Ethereum Foundation's perspective on this?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, Yeah, that was all super interesting. I think when I talk about, I think of decentralization, I also think about validators and not just builders, because there was this separation between builders and validators because we knew MEV was going to be a centralizing force, and we didn't want it to affect like the actual validator set, but just to affect like some builders, which turned out like it was definitely a centralizing force, and we see that play out maybe more than we thought it would, like in the terms of just like the number of builders that are like building most of the network's blocks. So yeah, I mean, I am pushing, for example, like an EIP to sort of like make it a bit better, because you have like these decentralized entities that are like doing some complex building tasks, and that are also doing with like dealing with searchers, maybe running their own searchers, and like that have also like complex, probably centralizing trading strategies. But I feel like it's not that bad if there are like at least some minimal checks in place to make sure like the builders are not like doing very, very crazy things. And so one thing, for example, is actual censorship. So it's not strong censorship in the sense that it like transactions that are censored will probably still go on chain at some point, but it's like they are delayed by a lot. And so, for example, like there is an EIP I'm championing that's called Fossil. It's EIP 7805, and yeah, the goal there is to like have a set of validators which are like still like way more decentralized, impose some constraints on what builders have to include in their blocks. So they build like this sort of like inclusion list or list of transactions, and they say, okay, we saw these transactions are like pending in the mempool, like you actually have to include it in your block, otherwise your block won't be considered valid. So I feel like that's the start of having this sort of like asymmetry between the builders that are very centralized, but also like that are useful, because like they are actually making optimal blocks. In the future, we'll also have provers that are also going to be probably centralized, right? Like they will actually need to prove Ethereum blocks, and that's like a pretty large computational thing to do. So yeah, I think we need to leverage the asymmetry between very sophisticated entities and very lightweight validator set that is much more decentralized, and we can like use this to impose some constraint from the very decentralized set to the very centralized one, and that's what we are like working on, and I think that's like a very promising direction to work on, to be honest. Yeah, there are like some caveats, like for example, like Fossil isn't really made for like extremely time sensitive MEV carrying a lot of value transactions. I do think that can also be looked at from the builder's perspective. Is the builder net effort. There are like other ones. I think generally it's still not there yet. Like we need like a lot more sort of assurances about like these builder networks being actually decentralized, and sort of like yeah, I just need to see a bit more there, but at least like I really like the effort of like going into that direction, because like not all of it can be solved at the protocol level, and you also need like actual efforts on the builder side of things, searcher side of things, to make things better there, because yeah, it's not all in protocol, that you can't solve it all by doing all in protocol changes, basically.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thomas did touch something that I'm going to talk about next regarding data ownership and power. So I want to start from Irfan. So if we zoom out, like who really owns Ethereum's most valuable data pipeline? And how does ownership shape not just access, but also the balance of power for builders, searchers, and researchers? Irfan?
Yeah. Um, In terms of what the validator set can do and what the builder set can do, I agree that censorship resistance, like at minimum, guaranteeing censorship resistance at the validator level is quite important. Yeah, I support Fossil as well. Yeah, of course. I think I think there'll always be centralizing effects to order flow, and it's very hard to ensure, for example, that um, it's very hard to ensure that, for example, your searcher gets the same execution guarantees as the next searcher, or your trading firm gets the same like treatment as the one as another. Like guaranteeing, for example, like latency, inclusion, other guarantees in the block is very difficult. But at minimum, I think the validator set can impose like adequate censorship resistance on the block builders. Yeah, I think this should be done like ASAP. Obviously, even now, like builders can only censor for a certain amount of blocks. There's obviously like 5-10% of validators that don't participate in in outsourced block building. So you get some guarantees there. But yeah, the biggest problem now in terms of censorship resistance is that you can censor for a certain number of blocks. Yeah, and I think Fossil definitely solves that problem of being able to of censorship resistance for a certain period of time. So it's important for the validator set to kind of like reduce the amount of blocks for which like centralized builders could censor. Um, so I think that's definitely like a responsibility of the validator set. Um, yeah, I think probably the responsibility of the validator set here can be summarized as like uh, ensuring censorship resistance for an average n number of blocks. Just reducing that like n number of blocks yeah, is probably the responsibility of the validator set. In terms of then you get the other problems of ensuring that every trading firm or every like searcher has like equal or fair access, like enabling like for there to be like an incremental searcher versus like or an incremental builder versus the entities that exist just becoming more and more entrenched. That's a much harder problem to solve. Um, and very difficult to do from the validator side, um, or the in protocol side. Um, um, yeah, I think there's things you can do. Like they follow along the flavor of letting multiple parties run the physical block building infra. It follows along, maybe obfuscating the source of the flow, and getting multiple people to stamp like an incoming transaction. Um, um, yeah, I think there's some attempt to kind of build a network of block builders that are independent. Um, so yeah, I'm definitely in the TE space. There's a lot you can do there to ensure that, like obviously TEs give you slightly better guarantees. That for example, like if set up correctly, that you can't research your flow, or if set up correctly that you can't, um, if there's adequate sharing between multiple builders. Um, um, yeah, so in summary, I think censorship resistance in protocol for n number of blocks is very doable, and I think Fossil's a no-brainer from my perspective. But in terms of other guarantees that are very hard, such as ensuring equal access for like multiple searchers, ensuring there's like privacy for searchers, ensuring there's equal inclusion rights for multiple searchers, I think that's something that can only be solved at the block builder level.
Okay, I'd like to reiterate the question. So, who owns Ethereum's most valuable data pipeline, and how does the ownership shape the balance of power in the ecosystem? So, I'd like to have Kofi to answer the question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for is on the product side, on the builder side, looking at people creating curated or, like I said, interpreted data. I think the centralizing force is just how much compute you need to build and to maintain and to share curated data sets. So like for instance, if you need some data sets around usage of smart wallets is a sort of big priority for the base team at the moment. That requires a lot of mixing and matching of logs and traces and so on. Especially now we have EIP 7702 allowing EOAs to become smart wallets, and there's that added layer there of passing through all those authorization lists. And it can be difficult for maybe somebody who's just an individual data scientist or like a small team to sort of afford to be able to build and run all of the infra needed to get insights on the level of, say, complex batched smart wallet usage, or things to do with trading of long tail coins that have very low liquidity, and so that ends up pushing the interpretation layer of our data ecosystem into the hands of a few companies that have the right business model and have the right funding to be able to afford to host all of that work. And honestly, path forward is for that, to sort of make it easier for everybody to be able to build some of this more complex data, from scratch with their having complete ownership of it. Because I mean, obviously there are ways that it affects the ecosystem if only some people can build certain insights and only some people can afford to pay for them. Especially, again, thinking about smart wallets as they become more and more adopted, and more builders and researchers and people building apps need to have a better understanding of what smart wallets are doing. It would be great if we had ways to just make it easier for everybody to get access to the insights that they need. But it's a hard question. So I'm sort of keeping my eyes open to see what sort of ideas GigaBrains come up with for how we can democratize access to those higher level things.
Awesome, very cool. All right, now this is going to go for the whole panel, this question here, and we'll go through Tomas first. So for some of the emerging use cases, such as restaking, intent systems, L2 infra, even rollups, or some of the pre-confirmations, all of those depend on like clear observability. Which frontier apps do you guys think will absolutely break without stronger pipelines? And do you know any teams that are solving those?
Yeah, I think I'm going to be quite boring in my answer, but I do think all of them, all of the apps, all of the sort of the infra needs to be open to begin with. Like, I don't think there is like a particular, category of apps that needs to be open and the others like don't. To me, like if the code is not open source, it's already basically a deal breaker. And then, there, if the data is there, like that's maybe like the first step, but we've touched on this a bit, but like if there is no effort made to actually surface the data and about an app or like infrastructure, it's also like a big problem. So yeah, I feel like blockchains actually I guess like public transparent blockchains like Ethereum have also been built specifically to provide more transparency, sometimes at the cost of privacy. But it feels like if you're building on a blockchain, like a public transparent blockchain, and you are like not making any effort to either like surface data or make it available to people that can surface it for you, it's just like a bad look for me. But I'm not talking about like extremely early projects that are like just like spinning stuff up and everything. I'm more like talking about like established infrastructure or an app that wouldn't have like any way to really know what's going on in the app would be quite bad to me. So yeah, probably making the data available first is the biggest one, and then make that data actually readable and formatted in a way that makes it accessible to everyone will be very important.
Awesome. Kofi?
Yeah, I'm thinking about cop out, but I feel like my answer is pretty similar. Going to encounter, not even necessarily about having the most complex, boundary pushing app. It's just as we have more and more L2s that get faster, it's going to be so much more data to process, and that's going to be a struggle for you, whether you're just, building a little, I don't know, a small token launchpad or some gigabrain sort of ZK application. I mean, if anybody here has tried messing around with Solana data, you're familiar with the problems that you get when you're working with a super high TPS chain that has multiple petabytes and petabytes of data that you need to pass through if you want to extract some insights. And so I think that, for the apps that we're going to have in the future and the issues that come with data, I think that a lot of the issues will be less about the complexity of the apps themselves, but more about how much load super high speed chains are going to put on the data layer, as well as like increasing complexity in how the EVM is actually structured. So again, thinking about things like EIP 7702, where maybe some decisions were made that haven't made it so easy for data analysts, such as something very simple of when there's an EIP 7702 authorization to upgrade a wallet to a smart wallet, there's no sort of field in the authorization list, or there's no receipt that's posted on chain that tells you whether or not the authorization is successful. So you need to go back and do all of this processing to figure out not just what authorizations happened, but which ones were successful, to then be able to do an wallet technology. Yeah, I think that for me, the question will end up being more about how the chains work than how the apps work.
Thanks. Sen?
Yeah, sure. So I think again from trading perspective and trading infrastructure developer perspective, the thing that I think the market is missing is proper trading data sets compared to say TradFi, and it's quite interesting because definitely volumes on DeFi grow, and but at the same time, if you want to start trading coming from say TradFi background, it's really hard to find not just data sets, just tools to do that. So and again, in our case, we had to collect this data set manually, and it was a pain. So for example, what you guys at Unify do, just properly tagging MEV transactions, it's super hard, and I think that nobody really does it ideally. So because some transactions, our transactions got mislabeled, things like that, and I think that the first step from trading perspective would be just providing these data sets and tools as a service. I don't know why it's not there yet. Of course, I mean, we're not sharing our data sets because it's our advantage, but I'm not sure why it's not a proper business yet. And the second thing, again, so this from trading perspective. From tool perspective, it's really interesting for us not just to see to see and understand trading flow, but also to see how people trade, how they bid, when they bid, how it all works, not just the result of it, but how people interact with each other. So within tool, we're building these capabilities. Again, we're democratizing flow, so everyone has access to the same flow. But then we're really interested in how they communicate, how they compete, how they collude, how it all is going on. Because in that case, we can really fine tune auctions. We can fine tune the network itself, how it works, so that validators and order flow providers they become more happy. It's not that it's not about I think for us, the goal is just building these data streams, collecting this data to just make everything more efficient. So more efficient order flow processing means that both order flow providers and validators make more money. So I think that's our vision on how we use this data.
Awesome, thanks. And then Irfan.
Yeah, on the data side, um, yeah, on the data side, I think that allowing more people, allowing there to be more diversity on the searcher and builder side, is probably pretty important. That can happen, basically allowing more of the BEV pipeline to see incoming transactions, to have similar inclusion guarantees, regardless of their scale, is probably pretty important. I think there's always preferences to allow entities that have the most flow, preferential access. I think that problem is quite intractable, and it'll be around for a while. So if you are an entity that if you're like a bigger market maker or a bigger if you're a bigger market maker, you'll always have some sort of priority access to block space. You'll have like a bit of advantage in ordering because you'll be able to demand it from your builder or from your validator. I think that's a problem that'll be around for a while. But the problem of inclusion, the problem of at least giving more read access to flow, I think that's solvable from the validator side.
Awesome. I think it's almost a time for us to wrap up. So Kofi had to leave because he's got a job call. Anyway, let's get some conclusion. So I want all the speakers here to give a single sentence to summarize the key points you like the audience to take away for today. How about we start from Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I think one takeaway from the conversation we had is like we need some more people working maybe out of protocol on trying to make it a bit more fair for lowering the barriers of entry for builders, or sort of like having some ways to get some less sophisticated people to also participate in trading or in searching or in building on Ethereum is actually quite valuable. So maybe one message or like call for action would be that it's probably a very good time to do that. I do feel like there is already like some efforts going into that direction, but like it's it's still early, and we haven't seen like a good sort of like product market fit yet. So if you're listening and want to dive into it, I think that's a pretty good opportunity.
Yeah, lower the barriers for people to crunch the data. Very cool. Next one, we have Arfan.
Yeah, conclusions, takeaways from this conversation. I think right now Ethereum does a pretty good job of censorship resistance, despite and kind of outsourcing like the benefits of centralized building and centralized transaction ordering. Within transaction ordering, as Ethereum grows to its next scale, becomes more. Ethereum's like quite old at this point. So at this point, there's some entrenchment of existing entities. I think the focus, obviously, the focus in protocol should be to increase censorship resistance. But yeah, the focus on outer protocol should be to kind of allow there to be like more entities in the building and the searching space.
Okay, cool. Last but not least, Sen. So what's your one single sentence for the audience to take home?
Yeah, sure. I'd say order flow is king. and only a fraction of data is available now. But we need more data to process it more efficiently.
Awesome, very good. Yeah, I encourage all the audience here to read papers from Thomas and check out projects built by Sen and Irfan. Also, of course, Kofa. Yeah, okay. Thank you guys. Thank you for being here. Very much appreciate all your points and view. We are looking forward to our next part of this data MEV space. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good morning.
Have a good one.